And we're live. You're listening to the Hashgraph Enthusiast Show.
Hosted by Brandon Davenport, aka It's Brandon D.
Well, GM, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching from, HBARbarians, Hashgraphians, Hedera Sexuals. Another week, holy cow, in the works. We got a lot to talk about. Good morning, No Man, how's it going? Zildjian, hello. Leave a comment if you're watching. Share the stream. And yeah, let me know if you got any news that you want me to dive into. I'm happy to check it out. We're broadcasting live on X, LinkedIn, and YouTube. The show's live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on those platforms. But also we got clips that get posted. It's also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So support the show, subscribe, give me a follow, leave a review, all that good stuff. And yeah, let's dive into some stuff. We've got some messages from folks. Good morning. Milton, GM, I love the coffee emojis. I always appreciate a good coffee emoji, to be honest. I had a bunch of people messaging me. We're going to talk about this later in the show, but I just wanted to give a heads up. I had a bunch of people messaging me about the BankSocial stuff going on. There's a substantial amount of funds that have gone missing to exchanges. It's a fluid situation. We don't have a full picture, but we've got enough information to kind of see kind of what's going on. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. We've also got Brady from Bonzo Finance stopping by in just about a half hour. He's been going goblin mode on socials recently. He's got that post that he did in regards to like Hedera marketing. He recently visited the BitGo offices in New York. BitGo is obviously a governing council member. He had a lot of thoughts on that. He's also been on the show before. I chat with Brady, so I don't know. I thought it was a good time to kind of get him on the show and hear some thoughts, because it definitely sounds like he has some. But with that, let's dive into some ecosystem updates. Right off the hop, this was really cool to see. Grelf interviewing Charles, the president of Hedera. I know this is probably not the interview that many were expecting as kind of a first community media foray for Charles into the ecosystem. And I know that the content of the interview was, it was maybe not what a lot of people expected. Still important. What kind of birthmark would you have? What are your thoughts on the thesis of getting a giraffe for the ecosystem? Talking a lot about bugs and fish. So we learned a lot about Charles as a person. So I'd say go check out that interview if you're in for a chuckle. If you're looking for anything serious, you got to know Grelf is Gerbert the Grelf is a silly guy. To be honest, I was kind of surprised that Charles could keep a straight face. It's pretty impressive, but shout out to Grelf. And you got to read it in between the lines there, right? Meme coin on Hedera, interviewing Hedera's president, whatever you may think about it. There's obviously something happening here. It's clear that Charles hasn't been in a position since he really came into his position. He hasn't been in a place where he could kind of bridge those gaps in this way. So I potentially see this as a sign of things to come. I'd love to have Charles on this show. Charles, if you're watching or listening or whatever, please shoot me a DM. I'd love to chat. But other than that, I mean, I view this as kind of a positive thing. I hope that we see more stuff like this with Charles. And I imagine too, this interview, because they didn't touch on anything too hot or too focused on topics of the day, I think it was a bit more comfortable for Charles. Strategic move all around, even though talking about silly stuff. I think that in the big picture, looking at this, big positive, to be honest. And shout out, cheers to Gerbert for pulling it off. The other thing too, really quick, that was funny is Charles was wearing a Disney hat. He worked at Disney, but people, of course, on Reddit and stuff were like, is Disney coming to the governing council? So, it was great to see. Also too, shout out to the HBAR Foundry group of founders and developers meeting regularly in Hedera. They published a community calendar. We've got Hashgraph enthusiasts on there, which is great. But yeah, on the hbarfoundry.com website, you got a community calendar here. A lot of people have been asking for this. Where's a calendar I can go to for like regular spaces or events or whatever? So you can get your event on the agenda. You fill out a form. I'd encourage folks to do that. We've needed this for a long time. It just took somebody just setting it up. So huge shout out to HBAR Foundry. Love to see it. Also, too, this was an interesting observation. We're going to be switching gears quite a bit in these ecosystem updates. Hashpoint Research, as I had on the show last week. Yeah, there was a great conversation last week with Brian from Hashpoint. Go back and make sure to check that out. It was a really great conversation. Good morning, Michael, tuning in. It says, hi, everyone. Hashpoint is a really interesting tool because not only can you see the TPS, but you can also see the funding amount that Atma.io has in their account. And so it's really interesting on their platform to be able to see how much money Atma has in their account that's used to pay for transactions for their use case, which, as we know, is 99% of transactions on Hedera, and time that. So based off of the volume and the amount of money they have in their wallet, how many days left do we have for Atma transactions? And as we can see, if I go to the Hashpoint Research dashboard, we're currently at 22 transactions per second. So it does line up. And the question is now, how does that work, right? How does the funding component work for Atma.io? But it's an interesting observation. Every time that account kind of runs dry, transactions kind of pop off. So interesting observation. And I imagine we'll see the TPS come back up again. Michael Garber at Hashgraph, aka Swirls Labs, sending out a fire tweet, posts, when the new stuff that's being worked on at Hashgraph, meaning, Swirls Labs, aka Swirls Labs, is introduced to the market, the world will not be the same. Once it is realized, everyone in doubt will bow with fully bent knees. There is no better ledger. So clearly, Michael at Hashgraph, clearly hinting that something huge is coming from their standpoint. And yeah, we're seeing a lot of this, which is really interesting to see. Also, Only LARPing from Karate Combat, founder of Karate Combat, Only LARPing. I feature his tweets on the show a lot. He says, October 11th, Karate's biggest announcement ever, live from Permissionless and Karate Combat 50. So stay tuned. I mean, October 11th, there's going to be something big. So he's posting that. We should probably, my next show will be on the 9th or 10th, most likely. So just days before this announcement. So that's going to be very interesting to see what that is about. Some folks have some ideas. We don't know quite yet. Chainlink. This was also interesting to see. A lot of folks weeks ago, and including Grelf on my show, were talking about Chainlink shipping Hedera, the repository pull requests for the Chainlink integration has received an update. That that it has become a little stale. So I think this is an automated action. I know a lot of people were talking about this. Basically, it implies that there's some kind of slowdown with the integration, or that something's on hold or whatever. In my mind, this is kind of an automated GitHub action. So if a pull request doesn't have a ton of activity for a while, it'll be marked to, inactive. So or stale. So I wouldn't read too much into this. I saw that a developer did rename ship Hedera to work in progress ship Hedera. So obviously, changes happening there for better or for worse. But keeping an eye on that. As we know, we've heard from a few different sources that, Chainlink, I say a few different sources, I mean Grelf, that Chainlink is coming to Hedera. So seems to be the case still, but just keeping an eye on that. Also too, very great observation from Zuik watching the show, saying we also have the upcoming Axelar announcement tomorrow, which will apparently involve Hedera. The HBAR Foundation was retweeting. Great observation. We did see the HBAR Foundation retweet this promotional content from Axelar. Axelar saying the Renaissance awaits October 3rd, which is tomorrow. Today's the 2nd. HBAR Foundation retweeting it. We've seen rumors here and there, a lot of people in the comments diving in and kind of, jumping on in anticipation of what this could be. Definitely this is pointing to a possible Hedera integration or something like that. There's nothing really concrete out there publicly right now other than this. And this definitely means something if the HBAR Foundation is retweeting it. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. And of course, Axelar means, bridges, all these different types of things. So very exciting stuff that's been a big talking point in the ecosystem for quite a while. Another update from a use case that many are familiar with that's gone through a rebrand that I think is pretty exciting. Scintilla is the new name of Toko. So if people were familiar, earlier this year, last year, all that kind of stuff. So DLA Piper is a governing council member, but obviously like leading global law firm, and obviously interested in DLT technology, namely Hedera. They're a very involved council member. Scott Thiel was actually at ETH Denver. Scott Thiel had left DLA Piper to start. It starts with an M. Momentous or something like that. It's a spinoff of DLA Piper. And then we had Toko, which Scott Thiel was also at, but Toko was dealing with digital asset issuance, and they also had received one of the first, or maybe the first, sign off and clearance from VARA, which is the regulatory body in Dubai. So it was very well positioned in there, and it was called Toko. And so last week, on Friday, we saw Toko unveil that they had rebranded to Scintilla. And this is a very interesting thing. There was an interview that Tim Popwell did with the HBAR Bull. I encourage people to go check that out. That goes in depth into this. But yeah, this used to be Toko. So I know that Toko is an important brand for a lot of people in this ecosystem. Rebranded Scintilla. It feels to be pretty much the same thing. In partnership with DLA Piper, of course, licensed by VARA in Dubai. Similar kind of offerings, right? Advisory, broker, dealer, exchange, different use cases. So this is something that I think is very interesting because there is fresh leadership. This is definitely a use case that is on Hedera and potentially other networks. And this is a spinoff with close ties to DLA Piper, a governing council member. DLA Piper being, I think, the main shareholder in Scintilla. So cool stuff. We're going to have to follow this. But this is an update from Toko, now Scintilla. And we've been seeing a bit of this, rebrands, moving around, mergers, migrations, people moving around different projects. So it's definitely a season of movement and change for the better. And that kind of lines up with what's going on with Hedera. at the core of the ecosystem. Some more kind of very interesting posts. I'd say very crazy posts. I feel like weekly we talk about David, CEO of Fresh Supply Company, FSCO, a use case with ties to MasterCard, a supply chain tokenization use case, a payments use case, lots of exciting things. David tweets, I would suggest buying more HBAR, right, on September 26th. So last week, on Thursday, I believe. Kind of wild. Like David's an interesting guy because he's the CEO of, an enterprise use case on Hedera, but he exhibits the degen behavior that the ecosystem is hungry for. He says again, yesterday, October 1st, I'm literally going to buy the HBAR and alts that people have just sold at Hedera. So again, someone in enterprise shoes acting like a degen, it's hard to hate it. I dig it. I mean, this is kind of the energy we like to see. And then something more substantive, which is interesting, posted today from David was, quickly, if you were writing a white paper for a government monetary regulator, what would you say Hedera mainnet benefits are versus traditional EVM options? And lists a few of the differentiators. There's some comments in the post highlighting some of these things. So again, this is somebody who is in the enterprise seat, interfacing with the community, interacting with the community. I like to see it. I like following David on X, so I dig it. Now, I want to talk about a bit of a bigger story. This was one that I think is going to pave the way for some very, very interesting things. So this use case was announced, I believe, Monday. I can't remember. We'll have to check. But basically, this is a new investment body, Canary Trust, that's coming from Steve McClurg, who was the former chief investment officer at Valkyrie Funds. And Valkyrie Funds, as we know, issued a Bitcoin ETF. So this is Canary Trust is a new entity that is an institutional access point for investors to gain exposure to HBAR in a managed way. So if we look at the post from Canary Funds announcing this, growth, risk management, and foresight, introducing Canary Capital, a crypto-focused firm providing sophisticated investment solutions, and our first private trust offering the Canary HBAR Trust, investing in HBAR. So this is, again, if you are a large investor that doesn't want to dip your toes into crypto so much or have a wallet holding HBAR with private keys and all these different types of things, you can do business with Canary Capital and get exposure to HBAR. We've seen this in a few different places, but this is the latest one. It felt similar on the surface to quite a few other announcements like this, but there's a differentiating factor here that is really interesting that I picked up from some of the press releases. If we look at the CoinMarketCap press release, a story about this, Hedera HBAR gains institutional access with launch of Canary Trust. Very cool. And talking about the announcement here, the Canary HBAR Trust is designed as a private offering, allowing qualified investors to securely invest in HBAR. And this is where it got interesting. The launch is reportedly part of Canary Fund's broader objective to pave the way for future exchange-traded funds focused on HBAR. So what this is telling me is there's a pathway that Canary Capital is focused on that gets us to an HBAR ETF, which is very interesting. The CEO of Canary Capital, also again the former chief investment officer at Valkyrie Fund, says, quote, the accelerating demand for crypto offerings seems to be exponential since this year's launch of spot Bitcoin ETFs. Continuing, yet there remains a gap regarding firms with institutional experience who are willing to continue to innovate and deliver solutions beyond retail products. So basically saying you got to have 1 foot in retail, 1 foot in institutional investing principles and ride that line. And I think that HBAR is kind of in a great position for that. As much as we can kind of criticize Hedera's approach to these kinds of things, that ultra conservative approach might make it interesting for some of these institutions to tap into. So Canary Capital. Now, of course, I read this and I go, well, this is CoinMarketCap. Like, who wrote this article by BC? Like, who knows? Like, what does this mean? Is this even real? So I looked a little further and I saw another article that actually, the headline is Hedera ETF next in line after first US HBAR trust launch? So similar content here, obviously a very substantial announcement. And then I go over to the HBAR Foundation post by Greg Bell, who I think is probably really behind a lot of the momentum with Canary Capital. And right here, where is this? Here we go. The launch of the trust potentially paves a path for future ETF HBAR focused investment vehicles as investors seek new ways to access cryptocurrency. So that's a very interesting observation with this. And it gets me thinking. So Canary Capital, U.S. institutional access point. We've really been needing this. We saw announcements last week regarding custodial solutions and also BitGo's USDS stablecoin. So there's all of these very interesting things happening when it comes to altcoins and stablecoins. And then you look at Hedera and how it's positioned, especially with the, stablecoin studio and asset tokenization studio that recently launched. It starts to paint a really compelling picture. And then you add on top of that, the possibility of an HBAR ETF, then it really starts to get interesting. So this is one we're going to watch pretty closely, and we're going to have to see what comes of it. I think Canary Capital is not going to be the first, not going to be the last. I definitely think that we're potentially going to start seeing more institutions kind of like come in with these access points to the Hedera ecosystem, because again, as much as we criticize Hedera's approach, it does make HBAR an attractive asset to investors that are looking to either enable use cases on the network, have exposure to kind of the enterprise side of crypto with the risks that entails. And then it also really highlights, the staking component. And we talked last week with Brian from Hashpoint Research about the yield being real yield. And so although I agree that there is a need to, get the staking number up, it is interesting to know that the yield on HBAR is a real yield. And it's going to be interesting to see some of these use cases come online. I think of FSCO. I think of, some of the different things we've been talking about over the past few weeks. What impact is that going to have on the network? Are they just going to be HCS use cases, or are we going to start to see more use cases heavily leveraging the token service, all these different types of things? I think about the Hyundai Kia use case that Eric Piccini, CEO of Hashgraph, spoke of. A lot of very, very interesting stuff going down. Speaking of that, I want to talk about the recent governing council meeting, because the minutes have been published, and we do have visibility on a couple very interesting things. Oops, my camera disappeared. So I want to read a couple things from this GC announcement, a couple little excerpts. As we can see the document here, it looks pretty straightforward, but there are a few sections that I think are very, very interesting. Namely, Lehman was on vacation. So I don't know if this is the first governing council member that Lehman was not present at, but a few people noticed that, and I did inquire about it. Lehman was on vacation. So, probably well-deserved. So I'm going to read a few excerpts from the governing council meeting that I found interesting. Also too, Tradeaholic Bear saying, hello, hey, how's it going? Thank you for tuning in. Anyone else, by the way, if there's any news you want me to touch on or leave a comment, be happy to chat about it. We have Brady stopping by in just over 5 minutes here, which would be great. Brady from Bonzo Finance. So a few excerpts here. Charles Atkins, right, the president of Hedera, updated the council members on plans for the Q4 in-person council meeting to be held in Miami, Florida, USA. So it sounds like there will be an in-person governing council meeting happening in Miami before the end of the year. So that sounds like it will be quite the shindig. Grelf is watching. Hey, Grelf. Good to see you. Also, too, some more excerpts here from the Governing Council meeting minutes. Simon O shared an update on a collaborative effort between multiple council member organizations and service providers regarding a CBDC project. Simon championed the joint effort as evidence of a healthy and collaborative Hedera ecosystem. So we saw quite a few news pieces surrounding CBDCs and stablecoins, namely some of the stuff that MTech is doing, and seeing it in the Governing Council meeting minutes, it does seem like there is still movement happening in regards to CBDCs. Now we know that it's more likely from a government standpoint, a utilization standpoint, to see stable coins take the forefront. But CBDCs are kind of still in the motion. So very interesting to see that mentioned in the Governing Council meeting minutes. Continuing on, another excerpt here. CoinCom continues to pursue its objective to develop and optimize a sustainable dynamic token economics model for the Hedera network. To accomplish this objective, CoinCom has reviewed the node rewards model and node subsidy options. CoinCom will review hosting and data costs and conduct a price elasticity study to inform the model. So what exactly does this mean? It's very interesting. Does this involve community nodes? Does this involve staking? We're talking about rewards models, subsidy options. Are we talking about subsidized nodes in some way? There's a lot to read into here. It feels weird to read into it too much, but clearly there's kind of internal debate and discussion and work regarding what does the future of Hedera's node structure look like as we kind of work our way to community nodes. So it's very interesting stuff. Continuing on, another excerpt. CoinCom previewed its plans to review network pricing, fee structure, and fee allocation between accounts. CoinCom will continue to update the council on its progress against these objectives. So basically what this is touching on is obviously the governing council and Hedera within their treasury holds billions of HBAR in all sorts of various accounts. So it's talking about potentially moving HBAR between those accounts to serve some purpose. And then also potentially making changes to pricing, fee structure, and fee allocation between accounts. So pricing would be how much it costs to transact on the Hedera network. The fee structure is very interesting to me because that basically entails how much HBAR from fees are sent to the treasury, the node, and staking. I know that a big point of contention has been people do think that not enough of the portion of fees are sent to account 0.0.800, the staking account. So this opens up a little bit of a window of, okay, is there a possibility here that they would change how much HBAR goes to staking? So that's interesting to see. And then also fee allocation between accounts. We already mentioned that. So very interesting points. Continuing, just the last couple excerpts here that I thought were interesting. Simon O updated the council members on recent conversations with prospective members, which range from nonprofits to large enterprises. I got some update. Oh, I hate emails. From nonprofits to large enterprises, Simon acknowledges the challenges inherent in the enterprise approval process. However, he remains optimistic regarding the quality of candidates interested in the council membership. So I think this is a very interesting point because, as we've known, it's been quite a while since there's been a new governing council member. I think it's been over 200 days since a new governing council member has joined Hedera. And that was a big comment that I've been getting recently from the community is, it's been a long time. When are we going to get a new governing council member? So that's an interesting thing. And we've talked about this on the show. What does that process look like? What are some of those challenges? It does seem like there are struggles there, but again, it sounds like, the pipeline is strong. So I really, in two ways, I would like to see more governing council members coming to Hedera for sure. I would definitely like more Web3 focused governing council members, right? We have a lot of Web2 companies on Hedera, a governing council, that I just think the balance is off. I think we need more ones like BitGo and Chainlink. Like we need more Web3 focused companies. And so that's something that I would really like to see. And also too, it was great to, I know this is going to sound a little weird, but it was great to see DBS Bank leaving the council because maybe there wasn't that level of participation. Maybe it wasn't a great fit, but we do need to see some of that turnover. So there's a few different ways to look at it. I think we just in general need to see some more movement on the governing council. It has felt a little stale in some ways. Now, let's go on to the last excerpt here from the governing council meeting minutes, and Brady will be stopping by soon. Simon and Charles discussed MEMCOM's objective to explore ways in which interested companies and possibly individuals can participate in and engage with council activities. MEMCOM will continue to update the council members as this initiative materializes. So what does this mean? Well, what this means is it seems folks on the governing council are interested in having more open conversations with members of the community, members of the ecosystem. And this is a very interesting thing because when we look at what's happening with the governing council, there's definitely some different things that need to happen when it comes to understanding the market. I mean, we've talked about it on the show quite a bit. And so I think that would be really healthy. Now, the other thing that's very interesting to me here is when they mention specifically individuals. I know that sometimes many, let me just respond to a message here. There have been quite a few like organizations and committees and groups that will, present to the governing council. I know most recently the Hashgraph DeFi Alliance, a group there presented to the council and stuff like that. So there are things that happen, but the word individuals is very interesting to me because what that implies is like a person. You really think of that. That would make sense. That would be something that would be super bullish if that were to be happening. James Pearson comments, DOVU news. Yeah, we do have DOVU news. Really quick, there was some DOVU news from DOVU. And this was involving Microsoft, which was very interesting. So Undo, a project featured on our marketplace, DOVU says, has signed a new deal with Microsoft for carbon removal via enhanced rock weathering. I've never heard of enhanced rock weathering, but again, another way to capture carbon. The deal expands on their 2023 collaboration because we did talk about this previously on the show. And so basically what the announcement from DOVU highlights is an already existing, we'll call it vendor, of product in their ecosystem on their marketplace with an existing agreement with Microsoft has kind of doubled down on that. Microsoft has doubled down. So that's a very interesting thing to kind of keep an eye on. But yeah, great call out, James. Appreciate that. Now we're going to move on to a conversation with Brady, which should be very, very good. I'm going to bring Brady up just in a moment here, but quick background on Brady. He's previously director of marketing at Hedera and Swirlds Labs, and he has since started, if folks aren't familiar, a new DeFi borrowing and lending application, Bonzo Finance, set to launch on mainnet soon, and a frequent guest of the show. So to be honest, I don't think there's any intro needed, but Brady, how's it going? It's awesome to see you, man. How you doing? Oh, you're rocking the Bonzo shirt. Let's go.
Rocking the Bonzo shirt. Yeah, no, thanks
Right
so much
on.
for having me. Always fun to join these, and love how much education you're doing across the ecosystem. I think it's so critical. And it's just all the work that you do is awesome.
No,
It's
likewise
really
to you guys. I mean, I've been loving to see. I know that you guys have been doing like the Liquidity Legends series and all those different things. So on the education front, I know that's a huge focus for you guys. So I mean, kudos to you guys, and also too like I know that I'm so excited to see borrowing and lending come to Hedera, and I know that you guys have dealt with a lot of like challenges along the way. I think how you guys have kind of handled those challenges along the way has been really commendable. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting space. Education is a huge component. You often cite Saucer Swap as a model for that.
Yeah, I thought Saucer Swap did just such an amazing job. At their initial onset, they were bringing a decentralized exchange online to Hedera, and it was something that was very new for the retail and institutional community on the network. And I feel like they did a stellar job educating everybody, myself included, on a number of things related to how decentralized exchanges work, and just super impactful getting everybody on board with this new thing. And so we're definitely taking a page from their playbook with regards to education. We want people to deeply understand what decentralized lending and borrowing is, how it works, how to use Bonzo, conceptually what the impact is likely to have on the DeFi ecosystem as a whole, and on Hedera as a whole. And there's, I think, a lot of really exciting things related to a boost in liquidity, like TVL overall on the network, greater accessibility of native USDC and other stable coins, which I think is something that the community is pretty vocal about. So a number of other things as well. It's just a lot of benefits that we're hoping to bring to the ecosystem through this.
I love it. Now there's so much I want to talk about with you, because I mean, I've been joking with a few people like, oh, Brady's going goblin mode on X with, with different stuff. But honestly, I love it because for folks unfamiliar, I mean, you're not just someone speaking from your armchair, like I think this or I think that. You have a lot of experience in the Hedera ecosystem, working with so many people in leadership in the governing council, but then also you have spent a lot of time researching and understanding other ecosystems, what works, what doesn't work. So you understand the enterprise aspect, you understand the retail aspect, you kind of get how they work together. And some of the content you've been posting, for me, has really been eye-opening in some ways, validating in a lot of ways. And I think that most recently, the first thing I want to jump into with you is I want to talk about the governing council. There has been, let's say, a lot of energy in the Hedera ecosystem, directed at various organizations, and the governing council has kind of always been this like monolith in the ecosystem that has felt maybe unreachable to a lot of people, but it's like a huge part of like the identity of the network. And you recently visited the BitGo offices in New York. BitGo is obviously a governing council member, and wrote a post on X that, I think both shocked some folks, but I think resonated with a lot of HBARbarians. And again, you're someone speaking from a place of experience. So I wanted to just kind of start it here, where you write in your post, quote, BitGo is but a single voice among many Web2 organizations that exist on the governing council. And while these organizations may be experts in their respective industries, they severely lack Web3 industry knowledge needed to strategically steer a public L1 network. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. How do you view the governing council today? How has your view on the governing council kind of changed over the years? And what's going on with that BitGo meeting and your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a lot to unpack here. And I think foundationally, a good lens to look through related to this, you cited experience in Web3 and obviously experience being at Hedera and, a number of things on that front. I think the lens in which I like to look through this at is emerging technology and how that evolves, and the components that are needed in order for a business or an application, or in this case, a network, to be successful in a market that is partaking in the emerging tech industry. When you look at the way that emerging technology evolves, it is it's not going to meet mainstream needs at first. It's going to undershoot user needs. It's going to look like a toy in many cases. And I think when it looks like that, it's something that's really easy to dismiss. And it's the classic innovator's dilemma when you have some enterprise companies, people that are very established, looking at a market that is emerging, that is really easy to dismiss because oh, that looks silly, that doesn't meet mainstream needs, that's not really anything that we want to participate in or do anything with. We also don't have the risk tolerance necessarily to do that. We see it in AI, we see it in any time an emerging
It's that
technology
phrase
comes
of
around.
like a solution in search of a problem is often said,
Right. And so what you end up seeing with emerging technology is it's an evolution, and market timing is one of the most important things when you look at an emerging tech market. And it's about trying to evolve with the market, and throughout each of these phases of evolution, meeting market needs on that timeline. And market needs are going to look very different as you evolve. Earlier on, it is going to look like meeting the needs of NFT projects or projects like Pump.Fun, and you've got dog coins and sushi tokens and things like that. But I think what's most critical is that you're meeting those needs to grow adoption, and you're part of the evolutionary and innovation process, so that by the time you end up getting to a state of maturity, you will have met the needs of the market along the entire way, and then be in a place where typically what you see is the market start to eat the lunch of incumbents and enterprises, and then those enterprises collapse into the standards that have matured. And one good example of that is we saw that with stablecoins. I think stablecoins right now has achieved a level of maturity that they are now seeing interest by Visa, by large institutional organizations. There's Web2 organizations that are using stablecoins in some capacity now to manage their treasury. And so, that's one piece that I think has met sort of is meeting market maturity. But there's so much more that is sort of still in an early phase of the market, that in order to be successful long term, you just have to capitalize on that through the evolution.
Yeah, that's a really great way of illustrating it. And I think that kind of tugs on, I think, what people are feeling, which is like, there is this, you obviously can reference the Lehman Harvard talk, where it's like, in the future, you're going to have 5 chains that succeed, and it'll be like the .com bubble and all this kind of stuff. And that's great and all. And it's one thing to kind of prepare for that, but it's another thing to kind of participate in it, right? Like, if you had to go back in time and participate in the .com bubble, let's say you were in Amazon or something like that, you aren't going to win by like standing on the sidelines waiting for the bubble to pop. It's like Amazon won because they were a bookstore, which could be viewed as a toy, and they were viewed as a toy. Their stock was tanking as revenue was going up. So I think that's a really great way of looking at it. Is there is this timeline that's playing out at this deep into the 4th industrial revolution. We can kind of see how it's going to play out, but it doesn't seem effective to kind of go, well, let's just let this play out and we'll be ready when the time comes, because to be ready means putting in the blood, sweat, and tears and toys, in the time being.
And I think a part of that is, in order to meet the needs of the market as it evolves, it's heavily dependent on leadership and people who are making critical decisions for, in this case, the network, to capitalize on trends that are happening in the space, to be living day to day in the market, to really deeply understand the current state of the market, and then ultimately have a thesis about where the market is headed. And when you think about it in terms of where the market is headed, we have gone through and will be going through a significant amount of change throughout this process. Yeah. And when you think about change, when change is heavily accelerated, it's an amazing time to be able to capitalize on change. With change, you end up having a lot of disruption. And if you can sort of predict what change will take place and when it will take place, you can be prepared to be able to capitalize on that. And that starts, I think, with people who really deeply understand the current state of the market and have the vision to be able to know where it's headed and where that changes. And I guess what I'm saying too is it's not a blanket statement about every governing council member. That's not the case. There's so much nuance to this. It's not saying, oh, rip and replace, everybody that's on there.
Get out of here, Google.
Yeah, right. It would be silly. but it is about ensuring that there's, I think, as you alluded to earlier, a better balance between companies that are maybe Web 2, but very forward looking, are doing use cases, have a stronger risk tolerance, combined with an overweight of Web 3 industry leaders that are living day to day in the market, and they're going to be making decisions based on the knowledge that they've accrued through living in the experience and strategizing for their own businesses, and ultimately and ideally helping strategize for the success of the network.
Gotcha. And so just to kind of like dive into this a little more, kind of more on the human side, on the HBARbarian side, I want to see if you feel the same way as me, where really diving into stuff, I'd say I really got into stuff in 2020, and it was like, wow, this governing council thing is just incredible. What a revelation. And Mance Harmon, right, the co-founder of Hedera, sidekick to Lehman, or Lehman's sidekick, would say, the Hashgraph algorithm is one thing, but something that is as important or more important is the concept of the governing council. Yes. And as years have gone by, and as we kind of learn more about other networks, myself, my entry point into crypto was Hedera. So I'm on a similar journey to a lot of HBARbarians, where it's like you get in, you kind of start to take a look around. At this point, the impact of the council and the alignment of the council to kind of what you speak of, where the market is now, I kind of feel like how far it's drifted, and kind of now as before, people would say governing council, my brain would go, oh, it's such an amazing thing. Now I don't know if it's such an amazing thing. It's less about kind of the concept of a governing council, and it's more about where are they at right now? Are they meeting the market where it is? And I want to know kind of if you felt that same way, kind of this incredible thing, and maybe some of that shine wearing off a little bit as the years have gone on.
Yeah. Very similar sentiment to you. I think the structure of a governing council is a really positive thing. I think when you look at other protocols and networks that are approaching governance in all of these different ways, using token weighted based governance, for example, it's really hard to get people to participate in governance and decision making. A lot of people are holding these assets as, speculative investment. They're not really deeply inclined to participate in governance, nor are they necessarily educated in a way that they're going to be the right ones to be making decisions. And so the concept of governing council, I think, is great. It offers decentralization of governance. It ideally creates accountability for the people who are making those decisions for the network. And the biggest thing is just ensuring that the people who are participating on governance are set up appropriately. They have knowledge of the market, and they know the right decisions to make. You can only be as good as, I think, the people who are making decisions and their understanding in order to be successful. And you even see like adoption of this model now by Polygon. Like Polygon 2.0 has
I remember that.
their own governing council now, and I think they looked to. I can strongly guess they looked to Hedera as a governing council model and said, hey, actually that seems pretty solid. Granted, if you look at the people that are on that governing council, for them, it's a lot of really deeply entrenched Web3 experts. The Zach ZBT, I think is his name.
Right.
He's one of the folks that are on there.
Crazy,
yeah.
And it makes sense. I mean, there's no perfect network. There are upsides and downsides to the governing council. And I think what in your post, you really kind of touch on one of the downsides, which is just the weighting, right? The council right now is much too overweight on the Web 2 side. And kind of what I see is, both from a leadership standpoint, maybe the decisions for, again, where the market is at right now aren't so informed. But then another side, consequence to that is maybe the Web3 companies on the governing council come up against unnecessary resistance, or are challenged in ways that maybe they shouldn't be challenged. Do you kind of feel that as well? And also too, kind of, I want to like dive into your meeting with BitGo and kind of some of your thoughts on that, maybe expanding from your article. But that's kind of where my head goes in the weighting of the governing council.
Yeah, I think we don't know all of the single discussions that are being had on the governing council. There's meeting minutes, and we get some insight into that.
Yep.
But it's hard to really know deeply what exactly is sort of taking place in these discussions. And then in particular, to address your question, the relationship between some of these Web3 companies and their thinking and proposals and other things, and what the relationship is between them and the Web2 companies. And so I'd imagine it would be hard as a Web3 expert that's living day to day in the space to join a consortium of individuals that aren't living day to day in the space and having to try to have productive conversation about decision making when the folks that you're chatting with aren't living day to day in the market and maybe don't necessarily have the background and the education to be able to thoughtfully participate in that kind of a discussion where they're on the same page. And so I'm speculating here when I say this.
Yeah, of course.
But, and again, nuance, certain governing council members, I'm sure, have more education than others, are more involved in Web3 than others. There's absolutely nuance here. But overall, though, I could definitely see that as a big challenge. I know that if I was trying to have a conversation, have a conversation with like my parents or grandparents or someone who's less educated on the Web3 space, you're almost trying to spend a majority of your time just educating on the foundational stuff in order to get to a point where you can actually have productive conversation about, decision making. So that's where my, my speculation goes with regards to that question.
I've got you. And something else to that point that you mentioned, you say in your, let's see if I can find it. Maybe it was in your other post, but it's kind of like when you hear about some of those concepts being delivered to the council, sometimes I feel the impression that maybe some of these council members are learning on the job in some respects when it comes to some of the core principles of DeFi, what TVL means, these different types of things. And I think for me, that's really kind of the core of like the concerning part of like, we're 6 years in, we're still kind of getting up to speed on some of this stuff. And I think that that's really the key consequence of the weighting of the council being to Web2. I think that you should definitely have Web2 companies on the council. I think that a lot of Web3 focused initiatives need considerable pushback because there's some crazy stuff that we might need to check ourselves on. The long-term vision is important, but if you're learning about TVL for the first time or something like that, this late into the game, that could be indicative of some kind of systemic issue or something like that. So I think that's where my concern stems from. And my brain kind of goes to, okay, that's a concern. What does the solution, kind of look like? And I think part of that concern was also when Charles, the president of Hedera, on his spaces was kind of, speaking on the fact that it wasn't easy for a company like BitGo to join the governing council. So it does feel that way. And I think that's where my main kind of concern comes from. And I wanted to kind of see if you were feeling similar about it. And like, where does your mind go when it comes to where do we go from here now? How does the council evolve,
Yeah. That's my concern also, is I think, if it was a challenge to bring BitGo onto the council, as I've heard in a few different contexts, what's the reason for that? If you look at BitGo as a player in the market, they've achieved a significant amount of maturity. They are doing things that are focused around obviously retail and projects, but also a lot of enterprises and institutions. They have a great understanding of the market. The individuals that are the representatives, some of the people that I met, they're very
and also
mature.
Too,
don't
they run like multiple mirror nodes, and don't they do custody for like one of the Bitcoin ETFs and stuff like that? So they're right in it, well established.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're great. So it is concerning to think that there was some sort of challenge with regards to allowing them to participate in this. And I personally don't know what the specific
Mhm.
challenges were or what the pushback was around. But I think the thresholds that exist for participating in governing council membership might be something to do with it. And I think those thresholds, they've changed a bit over time.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I think it was something around like a certain amount of like market cap as a
Right.
public enterprise company or a certain amount of revenue generated. There's
Which cuts off a lot of Web3 at the knees,
right. Yeah, exactly. And so I think loosening those thresholds to be able to expedite the ability for mature Web3 companies that can really make an impact in joining would be an amazing, probably first step. It also makes me wonder, and this is very speculative, but does make me wonder if there's a sort of protective nature of the old guard that exists on the council where, I'd anticipate in certain circumstances, people feeling threatened if they're the ones guiding this network by someone who comes in who actually really deeply understands the market and is challenging them on current ways of thinking. For many
Right.
people, as an individual or as someone, in an organization, I think they could perceive that as a threat. And so maybe that has something to play into it as well. Disappointing if so, because I think being open-minded and open to change and open to expertise is just an amazing quality to have in general. But yeah, that's sort of my speculative thinking on that.
Yeah, no, I share that. I share that thinking as well. And where my mind goes on that is then, we see. I think a really pivotal moment was DBS Bank leaving the council. I didn't know kind of the situation around that, but there is also, I remember Lehman talking about the fact that I think 27 members or some smaller number was sufficient for security of the network. So we do have some wiggle room. And I think that how my mind has changed this year is it's good to see governing council members join. It's also good to see governing council members leave. Like I look at governing council members, like for example, Ubisoft or some of these ones that maybe don't attend or aren't as involved. And again, we don't know details. Just because a governing council member isn't attending meetings doesn't mean they're not building something. But there is something to be said about, doing what we can to find that balance and figure out like, where are those blockers? Because yeah, my brain does kind of think of, is there that kind of resistance? Are there people on the governing council that are like, well, we can't have these people in there because it's going to throw my initiative off, when maybe it's not the best thing for the ecosystem. So there is that kind of bureaucratic element to it, these different types of things. It does feel like an institution, which is weird because I want to talk about some other topics, but a nice kind of bridge into that is you did a poll recently on X that was like, is Hedera a startup? Yes or no? I was kind of surprised at the result of the poll. I think that I've said on the show many times, Hedera is a unicorn pre-revenue, startup with a beta product that's seeing decent traction in different verticals. That's how I kind of view it. And it was weird to see, 30 or some odd % of people say, no, it's not a startup. What would it be? That was kind of surprising to me.
I was very surprised by that as well, actually. Based on a number of attributes, it is a startup organization. Yeah. It's in an emerging market. As you said, it's in beta. The number of employees that are participating in that, it's in the hundreds. It's very pre-revenue. Arguably, there is some revenue, but it is pre-revenue in terms of economic sustainability. And so, and I think this goes back to conceptually this idea of market evolution. When you look at, I have a lot of experience with being in startup organizations that grow very rapidly.
Hedera being one of them.
Hedera being one of them, yeah. But past experience includes, company DataStax. There's a distributed systems organization, joined when there was like 50 people and they grew to, they're in the thousands of people now. Cloudflare joined at like 153 people and they're in the the I think multiple thousands
Yeah,
of people. They're a
huge.
public company now, and watching the evolution that takes place as a startup organization that is trying to grow and achieve maturity, there's different things that you have to do along that path. There's different people in leadership positions that are best suited for the current state of the company as it's growing. And you have to be willing, I think, as a leader in the organization that can make these types of decisions, to know when at a certain point, hey, this next phase is now happening and we need to swap out this person who was great for the previous phase, but we need someone who's the right person for this next phase of its evolution. And that is how startups function. That is how organizations are supposed to function in going from a startup to a mature, large organization.
Yeah. And so that's a really great point, because this is also something on my mind too, is like when you think about Hedera as a startup, obviously very unique, arguably unheard of to have a startup governed by like the likes of Google and IBM and this and that. But then also too, even in the crypto space, Hedera also having a bit of a unique path. And in that context, and kind of to what you're talking about, is this a situation where, oh no, Hedera's veered off course and we're going off a cliff? Or is it a situation where this moment of change, of frustration, of whatever you want to call it, might just be, when we look back at it in retrospect, kind of par for the course for Hedera's evolution? You talk about people leaving to bring new people on that are better suited. I think about Charles joining. So these different types of aspects, is there a way to look at it in that regard too, of like, this might just be a natural expected thing for Hedera to be doing at this time? Like, hey, looking back, it's pretty obvious that we would bump up against these walls or these types of things. Or is this more just like a big surprise for everybody? Like, we didn't know that, the governing council wouldn't quite get the Web3 thing as much as it could have. I grapple with that kind of like, is this just playing out as a natural course of Hedera's evolution in its unique way?
Yeah, my belief on that is I think it was a really solid thesis at the beginning. And the thesis of these enterprise organizations coming on and joining and steering the direction of the network was grounded in, I think, a belief that the market would actually mature a bit faster than it has. And market timing is one of the most important things as a business, and especially a business in emerging technology. And if you're missing market timing, then I think you're, it's a great way to be able to fail.
Yeah.
You could have the best idea, you could have the best technology for a market that is supposed to exist 10 years in the future. But if you're not 10 years in the future where the market's ready, then you're going to miss the boat. And so I think it's ultimately like a reassessment of, hey, I think we got this wrong in terms of how fast the market's going to mature and the people that are involved as part of its growth. We haven't yet caught up to a state of the market where these companies, maybe being a number of them being on the council, actually makes the most sense. I think, in 10 or 20 years, maybe it is the right group of people. Maybe it is these large organizations, ones that have gone through the process. There's peripheral integrations and regulatory has been figured out, and a number of things that actually make this a great model. But today, a number of those things maybe haven't been figured out yet. And so it's, again, just not meeting the market where it exists, and market timing is just very important.
I saw a great quote. It might have been like a Paul Graham tweet or something like that, but it was this thing about startups where, if I recall correctly, it was like this idea of the number one concern for startups is being too late. But the reality is that most of the time they're too early. And Hedera might fit in that category as a startup that goes, here's where the market's going to be. Kind of to what you said, it's like great setup for 20 years from now, but it's hard to know that when they were getting going. But it feels like it was something that maybe was too early. And it's really on. The evidence has presented itself, and it's really on the governing council to kind of go, maybe we need to maybe not roll back a little bit, but as you've said, kind of fix the weighting, redefine what the role of the governing council is, how it works. I think we're seeing signs of stuff. Like I noticed that there's talk of the phase 4 and the governing council minutes and stuff. So it does feel like there's change. The question is it recognized? Is it going to happen fast enough with a council that consistently tells us to be patient? Things move slow. That's not something you want to hear in Web3,
Right. Well, and especially in an emerging market where things move so fast, and the competitive landscape that in which Hedera is competing, those folks are able to be agile and move fast and capitalize on trends that are happening in the space. And if you are moving too slow and there's too much bureaucracy, you're going to miss a number of those things. And I think back to a question prior to this, in terms of, is it catastrophic or detrimental?
Right.
I don't think so. I think there's so much flexibility, and to the point that the whole industry is so early still, that gives me a lot of hope that we're going to see a significant amount of change that is going to adapt to maybe some of these things that we're talking about. Creating maybe more alignment with regards to sort of the direction that needs to be had, and you can have decentralization and alignment, but you can't have decentralization and fragmentation. I think the fragmentation is another part of it that is playing into this as well.
100%. Now, there was a great observation and question here from Milan, community member. He sent a couple messages, but we can just kind of touch on this because this is a good point. There are layers to governance for Hedera, and he mentioned, we don't really see or hear about Breck McDowell, who is, the chair and also previous president of the board, making those day-to-day decisions. And he also brings up there are people like Tasker Generez and Ian Putter who have left governing council companies and are now independent board members on Hedera that aren't affiliated with governing council members. So there is this other, we have the governing council, but then there is, I feel, this other layer above it, which is the governing board, which has people on it that maybe aren't directly affiliated with governing council members that do have decision-making power. And it does, and also too, like Scott Thiel and a bunch of these people. So there is this other layer that, behind this monolith that is the governing council, there is another, monolith. And it definitely, I think that what I've heard from the community is who's really pulling the strings or who makes the control or those different types of things. And I just wanted to kind of maybe just touch on that for a minute. Is what are your thoughts on the council and then the layer of the governing board, these other individuals that are participating in kind of the day-to-day of the network?
The delineation between those two, I don't have enough insight to be able to speak on that in an educated way, to be honest. It's a lot more opaque. There's this aspect of transparency with regards to meeting minutes for governing council that gets released, but I think that things may be related to the board and how much actual control they have versus the governing council itself. It's a lot more opaque for me, and so I don't want to speak onto something that I don't have enough education on to be thoughtful. It's worth exploring. I think it's worth understanding, and then ultimately, speaking to specific individuals, I think I'm not a fan of that. I feel like it's difficult to understand what those individuals independently, their feelings or their sort of decision making or thought processes are. I think it is more of a systemic type situation where there should be a change in the way that everyone is thinking as part of that group. And then based on the way that they are thinking about a strategic change, that could result in maybe certain individuals being swapped out for someone else, or, having them, more adapt to whatever the overarching vision and change is.
That's a really great point. I think, Milan responded here, I think you hit the nail on the head. We don't really know enough about that. And I think that I want to move on to another topic, but thanks for like taking the time on me with this kind of governing council stuff, because I think really what we're getting to here is, I know that people are upset about the HBAR Foundation. I know people are upset about this and that, and there's a lot of different issues in the ecosystem that I think are highly visible. But kind of to what you were speaking to is, again, there is this monolith that is the identity of Hedera, the governing council, and then this other thing that appears to be a great source of how the network growth is informed, that is the governing board, and it's very opaque. And I think that you bring up the word systemic, and you can make the argument that some of the problems that we see at various organizations that the community focuses on may trickle down from the types of decision making that happen from the top. So unfortunately, there is this focused structure, it seems, in Hedera that is opaque, that ladders up to a group of individuals. But the upside is that might be what's necessary to make a pivot. If those individuals can do that, that's really the question. And really the only way is kind of bridging communication with those people. And I do like to see things in the meeting minutes of like, the membership committee and stuff wants to do more work in kind of bringing individuals and other groups into the governing council conversations. I think what we're seeing is the Hedera ecosystem and HBARbarians really realizing how much power they have and working their way up that ladder, which I think is a really healthy thing. And I think that there's a lot of fair criticism. There's a lot of people challenging these types of ideas and structures. And I think that now it's time for the community to really focus on, what is the governing council focused on, and who are the people on this governing board, and what are their values, and how well is it aligned with the business that Hedera has in this industry, and how aligned are they with the needs of their user base, the people generating revenue for the network. So I think that that's a really interesting to think about. I think that that's really where in my opinion, where the community should kind of steer their focus.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I think it's really easy to look at the certain foundation organizations, for example, and they're sort of engaging us day to day in a way that does expose them to more criticism, but ultimately they are beholden to many decisions that are made at the top level, at the governing council level. And, I can only imagine it's difficult for them to be able to do certain things if the decisions that are trickling down through their organizations are forcing them to act or make decisions in a certain way. And I think with the role of the governing council, it was structured and is structured in a way where we have accountability, or there's supposed to be accountability to all of the organizations who are participating. And so, when we have these really thoughtful conversations, that it's not just, throwing garbage, but thinking about this more strategically, this is part of that accountability exercise. I think I see it as decentralization requires accountability, and having these tough discussions are part of that.
And I think that's really interesting, because it really makes you think. We talk a lot about we need accountability in the ecosystem. There have been problems. Who holds people accountable? And what I keep rolling over in my mind is, where does the accountability come from? That's what people are wanting to know. And people in the ecosystem are kind of like, this group should be holding this group accountable, and the council should be holding these people accountable, and who holds the council accountable, and all these different types of things. And what I've realized more and more is that a core function of the community, of the token holders, to be the instrument of accountability on the network, even though it might be messy. Maybe it's not as focused as it could be, but that's kind of a thought I've had this year, is almost a kind of like, wait a minute, is it me? Like, is as a community, is this our function, to hold the network accountable? Is that something you've been kind of thinking about too a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at any other network in the space, that is the case to varying degrees. On that spectrum, for some networks, it's to the degree that token holders are actually part of governance. The token is a governance token, and so they can fully participate in that. And then to a lesser degree, maybe if the token is not a governance token, then they are participants in this economy that's being created. Every network itself is an economy, and there's governance of the economy, and there's a national currency that exists. It really is sort of like every network is sort of a country in a way. And the people should be, in a democratic system, should be have a voice as part of it. They're starting businesses in these economies. They're participating in these economies. They're paying taxes, I guess, essentially with regards to transaction fees in order to partake in it. And so they should have a voice. I think they should be part of that process.
Huge. And I think that accountability, how I see it, thinking of it in that context, I think it's a major kind of put the pitchforks away moment and really think about this rationally and go, okay, it's pretty clear that this community has some serious power. And, with great power comes great responsibility, and understanding the mechanisms of that power, because I think that we've been conditioned in the Hedera ecosystem that power resides in the kind of articles of incorporation and the structure of the governing council and these different types of things. That's where power lies. But it turns out power really lies in thousands of people focusing on a particular thing and moving it over the line. And so I think about things we talk about, like we need potentially new governing council members. We need potentially governing council members to leave. We need maybe answers from and information from people on the governing board. And so I think that if we can raise awareness around what these entities are and help educate on how they're connected a little bit. And I think that, our conversation here does a really great job of that, because it starts to, I think, get people thinking about, okay, what is that? Like, what can I do that actually matters? And I think that, I don't want to go too far out there, but Lehman kind of gives the instruction. The governing council members care about their reputation as companies, and Lehman, in an indirect way, is kind of like, there's the mechanism of power. If a governing council member or someone in leadership at this network isn't representative of who the people want, like a democracy, you have to figure out, well, what are the mechanisms of accountability or control that we have? And you have to do it in a way that is responsible. And that's dependent on, can the community organize, and can the community kind of like move forward on these types of things? That's definitely what I think about. And yeah, maybe just before we move on to some stuff, like your thoughts on that accountability mechanism, like, do you see it playing out that the community could muster up the energy to like shift the governing council or these different types of things? Like, are we in that territory right now?
Yeah, it's a good question and thought, and I do agree with the sentiment. I think that when aligned and vocal and thoughtful about the approach, not just flinging garbage,
too much of
that's
that.
not productive. Yeah, you can't just scream. There is a lot of power in community, and a lot of ability to create the types of changes that community wants to see. It does take alignment for that to work, and thoughtfulness on the approach. A good example may be like the karate combat previously, after a number of events where maybe Hedera wasn't as vocal or participatory in that. It got to a point where community was pretty frustrated, I think.
I posted a video like yelling.
Yeah, I saw. And I think that did get attention. And you know what? Frankly, it's unfortunate, I think, that it does sometimes have to get to that point to where no one feels good about critiquing so heavily on something. But what's being trained is that if they do behave that way, then change does end up happening. And so it's this cyclical thing where if that's what it takes, then I think people are gonna start to participate in that way in order to force change. And I mean, another avenue that I think maybe hasn't been as explored is looking at Hedera improvement proposals. And, historically, those have been viewed through the lens of technical standards and, more so things on the technical side. But maybe that is an avenue where an improvement proposal could be something that isn't just about a technical standard on the network or a change in the code base, but more so something that gets brought up to governing council as a change that is more related to the structure of governance. It could be an option. I don't know if that's the case or how that would play out, but I think it is something that's at least worth exploring.
Yeah, and you make a really good point, and I think that's the ultimate risk that Hedera faces and the leadership faces is this. That you articulated it very well. This conditioning, this training that the ecosystem has had, that change happens when we introduce chaos, or I look back at it, it's like, do I need to like post a video of like yelling on my phone? It's like, it doesn't feel good. And I posted it and I was like, what am I doing? Like, but you get conditioned in that way. And I think you're right. That's the ultimate risk. And that's the big signal here that I think Hedera really needs to listen to. When I say Hedera, I mean, the governing council and the board. That's the risk here. That's the systemic risk to Hedera is you're conditioning your, as you put it, kind of like population to understand that pitchforks means change when that's not healthy and nobody really wants that,
Exactly. And I think we're actually full circle here with this conversation, where it's a very reactive environment currently. It requires a lot of voice, and you do it a video of yelling about karate combat or things like that, where I think it should ultimately be a more proactive environment. But then going back to the beginning of our discussion, in order to be a proactive environment, I think it requires that the folks who are in the decision making capabilities of decision making, that they deeply understand what's happening in the space and the trends, and they can make those decisions proactively that, and listen to the community, that prevent the community from having to go through this cycle of reaction over and over again. And so I think it does start with ensuring that folks that are in these leadership positions are ones who have a deep understanding of the market and, can be proactive.
And yeah, you're right. We have brought this full circle where we talk about the alignment of the governing council with the community, and the reactive qualities are like the antithesis of what the governing council is all about and what Hedera is all about. Hedera is from day one touted as, the adult in the room by nature, the proactive, predictive, adult, not someone dealing with like reactivity or these different types of things. So I think that's the real great point here is we're becoming an ecosystem that is very reactive, and it's very much against, I think, the core values and purpose of the governing council. It's against kind of like the vision of what this network is supposed to be. And so how do we become more proactive? And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's about the alignment. Things are misaligned. And when you have that misalignment, it just starts to create more and more room for chaotic, reactive kind of like behavior. So that's a really, really, really great point. That's a really great point. And I wanted to respect your time because I know that you're a busy guy. You've got to bring borrowing and lending to the Hedera ecosystem. But really quick, before we start to wind it down, was there any topics you wanted to touch on or anything that you wanted to discuss that we maybe didn't get a chance to?
Yeah, no, really appreciate you having me on and the thoughtful discussion on this. And I think the last thing is I think there's critique in some of the discussions that are being had. There's critique in some of the posts that are had about some of these specific topics, and ultimately still very excited about Hedera and its prospective success and growth. And some of these things I think are just necessary as part of its evolution. But ultimately, like, very excited about Hedera in general. I think it's a great network. It's got an amazing community. If you look at sort of growth metrics and ecosystem development, there's a lot of exciting things that are coming online. Bridges are coming on soon. We've got lending and borrowing. The ecosystem's growing. A lot of very smart people participating. So don't want to make it all doom and gloom about all of this, but and so wanted to leave on that note.
100%. And I think that it's worth saying, and I say this on the show before, it's like we talk about these things because we're obsessed with this network, because we love it. If we didn't love this network, we wouldn't care, or we wouldn't be here. It's really when you are obsessed with something, when you love something, Milan watching with so much of that intrinsic motivation, that's when you really start to have people talk about these hard problems, having these difficult conversations. I think that it really needs to be viewed as signs of like a really passionate ecosystem that is very realistic and really dedicated to the success of this network. And so when we wrap all this up, and you can watch Brady and I up here, for people watching, like, uh-oh, these guys are freaked out about stuff. It's like, really what this is it's super bullish. It's people in this ecosystem that have been here since the beginning, that are so entrenched and passionate and obsessed with this ecosystem that they just want to go deeper. And so I think that that's what keeps me here, is looking at it that way, of seeing a lot of these people I go up to. You look at the HBAR bull and the criticisms he shares. You look at, Milan with his comments and all these different types of things. These people are still here. They're driving change. And ultimately, I think it's why we're going to see some of this positive change. And so I'd encourage people to continue pushing on the corners, hitting the gas, whatever you want to call it. This, as Milan put it, constructive dialogue. That's, I think, what's going to make all the difference. And for people on the outside looking in, I think it's really easy to get bullish on it too, because I think if you're someone on the outside looking in, you're going, well, okay, here's a network that, it's not like Hedera's alone in these problems. Like, if we want to talk about Hedera, like, Hedera has governance problems. It's like every network has governance problems. So I think that ultimately it's the struggles, it's the problems, it's the challenges that unite builders across networks. And I think it speaks highly of leadership, that they have cultivated a population on this network that is so informed and so focused on solving these problems. So as much as we criticize, when I look to Lehman and Mance and these people that are in leadership, it does speak highly of them, that there is this ecosystem that's been cultivated from the beginning. And there is something to be said about that. So as much as we criticize you guys, we're here largely because of you guys. So that has to be said too. So great points, Brady.
Well said. Yeah, they've cultivated an amazingly passionate community with a lot of really smart people. And we wouldn't be here if we didn't care.
Yeah,
So.
Be careful what you wish for, Governing Council.
Yeah.
But yeah, and a quick note on Bonzo Finance. I mean, you guys are blazing on all cylinders right now. What can folks expect coming from Bonzo Finance leading into the end of the year here?
Yeah, so today is the last day that we did a token-weighted points airdrop of Bonzo points to holders of HTS assets that are supported by Bonzo. So if you were a holder of those initial HTS assets that are going to be supported on September 13th at 4 p.m., that's when we took our snapshot, then you likely have Bonzo points that are available at app.bonzo.finance. We are looking forward to a mainnet launch, hopefully early October. We're still trying to figure that out with regards to Supra oracles going live. There's some grant-related things that need to be processed in order for that to happen. And then, enabling lending eventually. We'll enable supply of liquidity at first, and then allow for borrowing. and just really excited to see sort of what the ecosystem does with this new capability.
Oh yeah, it's going to be huge. Borrowing and lending, you've shared the stats before. It's close to 50% of TVL on other networks. So I think the impact borrowing and lending is going to have on the Hedera ecosystem is going to be crazy. So I'm very excited for Bonzo Finance and really appreciate you stopping by, Brady. I'll let you get back to the rest of your day, but really great conversation and really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, you too. Take care.
Cheers. Well, that was an awesome conversation with Brady. And I think that he raises a really good point. And I think it's really important to kind of just touch on this again, which is we have criticisms to the Hedera network. We are, citizens of the Hedera country, or however you want to, kind of, illustrate it. But I think that this is a pretty dynamic, informed, energetic, passionate, really smart ecosystem. And as much as we criticize leadership, there is something to be said about the ecosystem that has been cultivated. And when we talk about leadership, we can talk about Lehman. I'm an H-barbarian because I watched Lehman. A lot of people are H-barbarians because of Google or IBM or Boeing or these companies that are on the governing council. A lot of people are H-barbarians because, remember these days, because it was patented, because all these different types of things that were kind of against the culture of Web3. Now we've evolved over time, but I think that we're all here in this ecosystem building because of leadership. And I think that, again, it speaks highly of what they've accomplished. But time marches on. This industry changes. It's changed quite a bit. H-barbarians change as well as we learn about other networks and what's happening in the broader industry. And also, too, as people from other networks come into Hedera and flavor the community in new ways. And what it means is things have to change. Things have to evolve. Problems have to be solved. And the status quo can't be maintained. Hedera is a startup, and there is great value in meeting the market where it's at. And I think that's really a key point that Brady makes is it's really exciting to see kind of how things are going to go, but it's very important to kind of stay grounded in where things are, right? Enterprise has not done the crypto takeover yet. A lot of the revenue and liquidity and users come from DeFi related products. And Hedera really needs to play that game. And so I think we're seeing some good signs of change, and Hedera is continuing to innovate, right? We saw the Hyro announcement, the first L1 to contribute its source code to the Linux Foundation under the decentralized trust. So there are many innovative things Hedera is doing. And I think that the criticism shared is really fair. I think that the questions raised are really fair. I think that a lot of the frustration is fair, but I do think that the community's approach also can continue to be refined and changed, right? Just as much as we want Hedera to change, I think that our approach can continue to be refined and changed. The types of conversations that we have, and how do the mechanisms of accountability work, right? So I think that's the key point. But huge shout out to Brady for joining the show. Always a pleasure to have him on. And I think that was a really interesting conversation. I don't think we talk about the governing council enough. And also the things that ladder up from that, like the governing board. I think that those things should be top of mind for people. Now, I want to talk about something that is in the news today that a bunch of folks have asked me to speak on. Now, again, this is an evolving situation. I'm going to just talk quickly about BankSocial. Appreciate that. Some folks commenting, great conversation. Yeah, I think people really enjoyed that conversation. But yeah, I want to move on to BankSocial, the BankSocial situation. So with BankSocial, bit of background. BankSocial is a company that has a token, BSL token. The token has a 4% fee on it. Those fees go to a social lending pool, aka an account, I believe, that stores those funds for the purposes of loans. And those loans are created with the oversight of a DAO. BankSocial also has the DeFi credit union stuff with the credit union things. They have the Secura initiative. So they're a pretty established and robust project. I know that Mance Harmon joined the board advisory for BankSocial. So they're a pretty robust project. Now, recently, there's been some controversy around that social lending pool referred to as the SLP, the social lending pool. And this issue is surrounding an amount of BSL tokens equaling about $400,000 being sent to various wallets and exchanges. So there's a Reddit post, a bit of a timeline on this. So there was, let me see here. Yeah. So account 4318346 sent 7.2 million HBAR to this other account on the 16th of September. And then that account sent multiple transactions to various exchanges on the 17th of September. These are the accounts and the transfers from Hashscan. Most of the funds were sent to Binance and ChangeNow/Now Payments across chain DEX. The recent transactions can be viewed on Hashscan. And so that really, I think, raised alarm bells because I think that those activities on that account, because it wasn't overseen or communicated by the DAO or those different types of mechanisms in BankSocial's ecosystem, it did appear to be something abnormal. So there was updates from BankSocial in regards to this. There's a Reddit post that kind of shared some of these. BankSocial CEO states, drained $400,000 lending account was not controlled or maintained by BankSocial, but the responsibility of the DAO. President Hodl, John Wingate, CEO of BankSocial, says in the BankSocial Telegram, we're actively looking into the HBAR social lending pool issue. Nothing conclusive yet, but it's our priority. As a BSL holder, my focus aligns with the goals of the DAO, and we're all working towards the same outcome. Measured transparency remains essential. We appreciate your understanding as we follow the right procedures to ensure we are moving things forward in the way that makes the best progress towards the next announcement that we possibly can. So clearly providing updates, but I think that the main question on people's minds is kind of like, you know, who signed the transaction or who holds the keys for that account? Who can authenticate the transactions there? Hours ago, John Wingate shares an update to X. Quote, we are aware of the misappropriated HBAR social lending pool funds and are investigating with authorities. To protect the investigation, we can't share more now, but our focus is resolving this swiftly to safeguard the community. Will stay tuned. To recap what we know, the Saucer Swap liquidity is safe. The Ethereum lending pool is safe. The only effective part of the ecosystem was with the HBAR lending pool. While the investigations happen, we are still building. We will get through this together. So I think that this is, again, an issue of communication because to me, I think that because this happened on the 17th, and it's been lingering for quite a bit, I think that it's difficult to watch unfold because for many reasons, it doesn't paint a good picture, right? There is definitely a lack of transparency and odd communication. I mean, there was a message sent also in their Telegram that kind of, you know, gave me a weird, you know, feeling. In the Telegram, it says, the DAO owns the funds of which you are a member. And this is in response to a question around like this kind of oversight, because apparently the DAO controls this account in which the funds were moved from. And so the DAO owns the funds which you are a member. That's why It is his job to watch them. Everyone in the community has the ability to watch that account, and none of us caught it until a couple days ago. If you're going to point fingers, don't forget to include yourselves. It's a fact. Tinkerbell, not my fault. You are lazy investors that expect everything to be done by others. So obviously a lot of miscommunication. This message came across as pretty aggressive. And so basically what I can piece together so far is there were funds that were moved from an account controlled by the BankSocial DAO. BankSocial itself doesn't control the account. The DAO does, and it appears is charged with overseeing activity on the account, and missed seeing that activity or whatever that transfer was until, as this message said, a few days ago. So and now John Wingate mentions that authorities are involved. So we don't it's pure speculation at this point. And again, I have to say straight up, I hope that it's, a lot of people float around like, is this a rug or whatever this could be? We don't know the details at this point. And I think that that's maybe part of this issue as well, as there isn't enough details provided at this time. So a lot of speculation is rampant around this right now. But my own opinion is because of all the different pieces of information that we have, it does seem like there is some form of nefarious behavior, whether it is from within groups that control this wallet, or some form of hack or social engineering. We've seen a lot of stuff going around in regards to weird Zoom links being sent and private keys being given to people. So is this a situation where somebody that had the access to the private keys for this wallet was phished or socially engineered in some way? Maybe. We don't really know. I think what the real takeaway here is that there is a project in this ecosystem that is, I'd say, an important project still, because again, it has Harmon's name attached to it, all these different types of things. It is focused in a important space. And this is just really unfortunate. I think that communication could definitely be better on this. And we're just going to have to see how this plays out. But as each hour kind of passes, I think that, there is a lot of brand damage to BankSocial, and it's something that our ecosystem doesn't need right now. It would be it would be a huge bummer to find out they got hacked or socially engineered and funds were stolen from that project. A project that is so focused on security and robustness. It also feels weird that responsibility of this is kind of being skirted off to the DAO, because, there's folks on the DAO who has control over the wallet, who has the keys, those different types of things. So I think that it with every update provided, it just raises more questions. And my read on it is that it's a situation that's, I don't think, being handled the best that it could be handled. I think that it definitely, if it is the case that, everybody's squeaky clean and it's, just a case of, a hacking or something, it definitely, the updates paint a different picture, which is unfortunate. And, we'll just kind of have to see how this plays out. So I don't really want to speculate further on it. But it's just the sense that I get from the announcements. It's a really unfortunate situation, and it's a tough situation as a project to be in. There are many good projects in this ecosystem that get hacked and stuff like that. I just think what separates this situation is this is again a established financial institution-esque project that this type of thing shouldn't happen to. And I don't think that the severity of this is reflected in the updates provided to the community. This is really like a pretty alarming situation. So we'll have to see. But yeah, I'm going to continue watching this. I just, at this time, I just don't want to speculate too much on it. One lesson I've learned in this ecosystem is it's really easy to connect dots. And I just don't want to, I just don't want to speculate. I mean, we've got hundreds of people watching the show and different things like that. I don't want to speculate too much on it. I just want to make sure people are aware of it, and just express, the fact that, the communication on this has not been great. So I'm really hoping that there is the most positive outcome to this. But unfortunately, as time goes by, it's difficult to see that. So we'll have to see how it plays out. And, holders of the token, actually even beyond that, I think that really it's so important right now. I've seen so many posts on X about this. You have to be so careful right now. There are so many incredibly advanced phishing scams and social engineering scams that are going around. There is a legitimate possibility that very experienced Web3 people could get their funds stolen. We've seen very well-known, high-profile Web3 experts that are no stranger to phishing scams have their funds stolen. And it's just a really unfortunate thing. We've seen people in the Hedera ecosystem with the Zoom link hack. We've seen that happen too. So I think that, this is also just a call to action to really be very careful about protecting your accounts and your information right now. And I'll say specifically, when you get direct messages on X or any platform, it's really messed up to say this, but don't respond to them. If you, for example, get a message from a prominent person in Web3 that you follow, or, somebody from that regard, it's very similar to if you get a call from your bank. What I generally do, if I get a call from my bank, I say, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang up here and I'm going to call back and just continue on the conversation. Because if you call your bank back and you say, hey, you guys called me about such and such situation, most of the time they're going to be like, we don't know what you're talking about. That wasn't us. So I would recommend that if you're getting communications from people that aren't in an existing channel, like you're just getting a fresh DM or something like that, take a minute and maybe do kind of like some kind of like two-factor authentication in a way where if you get a message on X from an influencer or from someone in the community that you haven't talked to in the past or anything like that, maybe say, hey, let me message you on LinkedIn or some other platform. You can go and search them up and get in touch, and just make sure that you're talking to the right person. Any way that you can authenticate that communication is super important. Just don't respond to DMs cold, especially DMs that just feel like scam or spam, so just please be very, very careful out there right now. And as we potentially have a bull market coming, the scams are just going to get much worse. And to be honest, we haven't really had a really massive scam on Hedera in the sense of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, or really widespread, rampant, high volume scams. Because the Hedera ecosystem has, as we talk about on the show, remained pretty small. As we grow, we're going to see more of that. So just please be careful, everybody. And we're going to continue keeping an eye on the BankSocial stuff. So I'd say continue following them for updates on the situation, and just be super careful. And I would say to BankSocial, transparency is key. I think more information should definitely be provided, especially who is authorized to sign transactions from that account would be very important to know. But with that, I don't think we missed anything. This was a big episode, big conversation with Brady. I was so happy Brady was able to stop by because, again, a lot of his points and takes on the governing council really kind of changed my thinking on a lot of things. The topic of accountability in the ecosystem, the roles that various people play, pulling back the lens on some of the more opaque aspects of this ecosystem, like the governing board and different things like that. Those are really interesting topics, and I feel really important topics to discuss. And on the flip side, really refining the approaches that we take as a community. It's going to be imperative that us as a community, again, break down silos, really competitors seeing each other as collaborators, having focused initiatives, because if you have thousands of people focused on one thing, we see what happens, right? It is possible to drive huge amounts of change. So again, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that the Hedera ecosystem is way more powerful than we know. So it'll be really interesting to see how that stuff unfolds. If you want to support the show, you can easily support the show by sending HBAR to the show's wallet, 0.0.1725506. I sell the tokens sent to that wallet to pay for, the StreamYard subscription, equipment for the show, all these different types of things. I'm also continually improving the show. As you've noticed, I've been having more guests on the show, which I think is really important right now at this time, because there's so many conversations to be had, especially the kinds that I've been having with Brady. And a free way to support the show too is just subscribe on, X, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave a review, share it, leave a like, free ways to support the show, which is greatly appreciated. And yeah, the wallet again is 0.0.1725506. All sorts of tokens accepted, HBAR appreciated, fun memos appreciated. And yeah, quite the episode. So lots that we talked about, some things to keep in mind coming up tomorrow. What's going on with Axelar? October 11th, what's going on with Karate Combat? There is so much stuff happening in the pipeline. I know that we've had some tough conversations, but holy cow, there's some really exciting stuff happening in this ecosystem. I'm feeling a lot of energy, and I'm hoping that there's a lot of change coming. But yeah, the stuff that I'm seeing and the energy that I'm seeing in this ecosystem is really exciting. And the news that we kind of see that I'm talking about today, it's big stuff. Every week, the stories are crazy. Last week, we talked about a governing council member, BitGo, is going to be launching a stablecoin, USDS. They're aiming for 10 billion in liquidity within a year. It's crazy stuff. We've got folks like Brady meeting with governing council members in person in New York, and we've got the governing council themselves looking for ways to meet with individuals from the community and bring them on board. There is so much positive change happening. It needs to happen faster, but it is happening. And then you got Hyro. There's so much. So I think that a lot more good than bad. And like Brady and I were saying, all of this type of stuff comes from a place of love and obsession for this network. I don't think people would be digging their heels in this much if they didn't love HBAR. So just makes me super, super bullish on this ecosystem and all the different assets in the ecosystem. So that is enough said. Really appreciate everyone tuning in. Get that theme song going. Make sure to follow, like the show, all that kind of stuff. It's live every Wednesday, every week, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. I'll continue having more guests on. Let me know if there's a guest you'd like me to have. Share the show, all that kind of good stuff. Shout out again to Brady for joining the show. Really appreciated. Bonzo Finance. Let's keep it going. I dig it. Also, shout out to the NFT ecosystem. Stuff's happening. Stuff's going on. What do we know? Hello, future. Goodbye, past.
Thanks for listening to the Hashgraph Enthusiast Show, hosted by Brandon Davenport.
Listen to past episodes and support the show at itsbrandond.com/hbar.